They called her the Silent One, the daughter who brought shame to the Crystal Throne simply by existing. But what if everything the galaxy believed about broken hearts and worthless souls was nothing more than a lie designed to hide the most dangerous truth of all? What if the one thing that made her different was exactly what the universe needed to survive? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Grand Hall of Nexus Station had never witnessed anything quite like this moment. Floating in the void between human and alien space, the massive diplomatic complex buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from across the galaxy gathered for what many hoped would be the end of 3 decades of bitter conflict. The Terran Federation and the Kytharan Empire were finally ready to sign a peace accord, and every major species had sent their finest diplomats to witness history in the making. Jake Morrison stood near the back of the observation deck, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched the elaborate ceremony unfold below. He'd been a soldier once, had fought in the border skirmishes that claimed too many good people on both sides. Now he served as a cultural liaison, one of the few humans who'd bothered to learn Kytharan customs well enough to help smooth over the inevitable misunderstandings that arose when two vastly different civilizations tried to coexist. The Kytharans were a sight to behold, even for someone who'd spent years studying them. Their translucent skin caught the ambient light of the station's crystal fixtures, creating patterns that shifted like living art across their tall, elegant forms. When they moved in harmony, which they almost always did, it was like watching the carefully choreographed dance of living gemstones. Their technology responded to their emotional resonance, literally glowing brighter when they were content and dimming when distressed. Jake had always found it fascinating how their inner states were so visible to anyone who knew how to look. Emperor Varric commanded the center of the hall, his massive frame draped in robes that seemed to be cut from starlight itself. The crystal crown upon his head pulsed with deep blue energy, marking him as one of the most powerful resonance wielders in Kytharan history. When he spoke, his voice carried through the station's acoustics with perfect clarity, each word precisely chosen to demonstrate the measured dignity of his people. The human delegation looked almost plain by comparison, their simple formal wear and straightforward posture a stark contrast to the flowing grace of their alien counterparts. Ambassador Chun led the human contingent with quiet competence, her decades of diplomatic experience evident in every gesture. Jake respected her tremendously, but he sometimes wondered if she truly understood how complex Kytharan society really was beneath their polished exterior. As the Emperor began his formal address, Jake noticed someone else in the Kytharan delegation who didn't quite fit the pattern. A young female stood slightly apart from the others, her skin noticeably more opaque than those around her. While the other Kytharans seemed to shimmer with inner light, she appeared almost solid, as if the luminous quality that defined her species had somehow been drained away. Her head was bowed, and she kept her hands folded in front of her in a gesture that Jake recognized as one of submission rather than the confident bearing displayed by the rest of her people. He'd heard whispers about Emperor Varric's youngest daughter during his cultural studies. The Kytharans called her Maya, though they rarely spoke her name with anything approaching kindness. She was what they termed resonance dead, unable to interface with the crystal technology that formed the backbone of their civilization. In a society where one's worth was measured by their ability to harmonize with their technological systems, she was essentially considered a living ghost, present but largely irrelevant to the functioning of their world. Jake watched as the Emperor's speech turned toward the gifts that would be exchanged to cement the new alliance between their peoples. It was traditional in Kytharan culture to offer something of personal value, a gesture that demonstrated trust and goodwill. The human delegation had prepared carefully, selecting art and literature that represented the best of Earth's cultural achievements. But as Emperor Varric gestured toward his silent daughter, Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Surely the Emperor wasn't planning to. No, even the Kytharans wouldn't be so callous as to treat a sentient being as a mere object to be traded. But the longer Jake watched, the more certain he became that something deeply wrong was about to happen. The Emperor's voice carried across the hall with ceremonial grandeur as he began to speak about sacrifice and the bonds that must be forged between their peoples. Maya never raised her head, never showed any sign that she was aware of the words being spoken about her. Jake found himself stepping forward without quite realizing it, his instincts as both a soldier and a human being screaming that he was about to witness something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The assembled delegates watched in fascination and growing horror as the true nature of the Kytharan gift became clear, and Jake Morrison prepared to make a choice that would change not just his own life, but the fate of two civilizations hanging in the balance of this moment. The moment Emperor Varric raised his jeweled hand toward his daughter, Jake Morrison knew exactly what was coming. The ceremonial words flowed from the Emperor's lips like honey laced with poison, each syllable carefully crafted to sound generous while delivering the cruelest possible blow. The massive hall fell silent as every diplomat, aide, and observer strained to understand what they were witnessing. "In the spirit of unity between our great civilizations," the Emperor announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I offer to our human friends a token of Kytharan heritage. My daughter Maya, who though lacking in the gifts that define our people, may yet serve some purpose in your more accommodating society." The words hit the assembled crowd like a physical force. Jake watched as shocked murmurs rippled through the human delegation, while the Kytharan nobles remained eerily silent, their luminous skin flickering with what he'd learned to recognize as suppressed amusement. Ambassador Chun's face had gone pale, her diplomatic training clearly struggling to process what appeared to be the casual gifting of a sentient being. Maya herself remained motionless, her opaque skin showing none of the emotional resonance that would have revealed her inner state to the watching crowd. Jake wondered if this was how she'd learned to survive in a society that measured worth by visible light, by becoming as invisible as possible. Her silence wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of someone who had learned that speaking only brought pain. Emperor Varric continued his elaborate explanation, each word designed to twist the knife deeper. "She cannot interface with our sacred crystals, cannot contribute to the harmonic resonance that powers our civilization. Perhaps among humans where such limitations are more commonplace, she might find a place." The Emperor's tone suggested he was offering damaged goods with questionable value, making it clear that this gift was more burden than blessing. Jake felt something hot and dangerous rising in his chest as he watched this public humiliation unfold. He'd seen enough cruelty in his military service to recognize it in all its forms, but there was something particularly vicious about the Emperor's casual dismissal of his own daughter. The man was systematically destroying her dignity in front of representatives from across the galaxy, ensuring that everyone present would remember Maya as the broken princess no one wanted. The human delegates exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unsure how to respond to what appeared to be both a diplomatic gift and a potential international incident. Ambassador Chun stepped forward, her voice carefully neutral as she attempted to navigate the treacherous waters of interspecies protocol. "Your Majesty, we are honored by your gesture, but perhaps we should discuss the details of such an arrangement in private." The Emperor's laugh echoed through the hall with crystalline precision. "There are no details to discuss, Ambassador. She is of no use to the Kytharan Empire, but perhaps your people will find her entertaining. Consider it our contribution to your cultural exchange programs." That was the moment Jake Morrison stopped being a diplomat and became something far more dangerous. He'd spent his entire adult life serving others, first as a soldier protecting human colonies from raiders, then as a cultural liaison, helping prevent the misunderstandings that led to wars. He understood duty, sacrifice, and the sometimes harsh necessities of politics. But watching a father casually destroy his daughter's humanity for the sake of a diplomatic gesture crossed every line he'd ever drawn in his moral landscape. Jake stepped forward from his position in the observer section, his movement cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. Every eye in the hall turned toward him as he walked with measured steps toward the center of the ceremony. He could feel Ambassador Chun's horrified gaze burning into his back, could sense the ripple of confusion spreading through both delegations as a mid-level cultural liaison inserted himself into the most important diplomatic event in recent history. "I'll take her," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic design. The simple words hit the assembled crowd like a thunderclap, and Jake watched as Emperor Varek's confident expression flickered with the first sign of uncertainty he'd shown all day. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I beg your pardon?" the Emperor asked, his tone suggesting that Jake had perhaps misunderstood something fundamental about the situation. Jake met the alien ruler's glowing eyes without flinching. "You're offering her as a gift to humanity. I'm accepting on humanity's behalf." He turned slightly to include Maya in his field of vision, though she still hadn't raised her head. "If she's willing." The Emperor's skin began to pulse with deeper hues, a sign that Jake recognized as either anger or confusion. "You are not authorized to make such decisions for your government." "I'm authorized to accept cultural exchanges," Jake replied calmly. "And I'm certainly authorized to offer protection to anyone who needs it." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Unless, of course, your Majesty is reconsidering your generous offer." The hall erupted in whispered conversations as the full implications of Jake's intervention became clear. Emperor Varek found himself trapped by his own cruelty. He'd made the offer in such public and definitive terms that withdrawing it now would be seen as weakness by both his own people and the human delegation. The Emperor's jaw tightened as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered by a simple human who'd turned his attempt at humiliation into a demonstration of human dignity. For the first time since the ceremony began, Maya lifted her head. Her eyes, Jake noticed, were the deep blue of Earth's oceans, and they held an intelligence that her father's cruel words had tried to deny. She looked at Jake with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between hope and terror, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone had just treated her like a person worth defending. "Very well," Emperor Varek said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled irritation. "She is yours. Take her and go, and may you find whatever value in her that we could not." Jake nodded once, then turned to Maya and offered her his arm with the same courtesy he would have shown to any dignitary. "Shall we?" he asked quietly, and for the first time in the entire ceremony, she smiled. The transport shuttle felt impossibly quiet after the chaos of Nexus Station. Jake had managed to secure passage on a civilian freighter heading toward the outer colonies, far from the main shipping lanes where Imperial patrols might think to look. Maya sat across from him in the cramped passenger compartment, her hands folded in her lap in that same gesture of submission he'd noticed during the ceremony. She hadn't spoken since they'd left the station 3 hours ago, though Jake caught her stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Captain Torres, the grizzled freighter pilot who'd agreed to take them on with minimal questions asked, had provided them with basic traveling provisions and a small cabin near the cargo hold. Jake was grateful for the man's discretion. Word of what had happened at the peace talks was probably already spreading through official channels, and he had no idea what kind of diplomatic storm his intervention might have triggered. The silence between them stretched until Jake finally decided to break it. "Are you hungry?" he asked, gesturing toward the meal packets Torres had provided. "I know Kytharan dietary requirements are different from human ones, But these are supposed to be universal nutritional supplements. Maya looked up at him with those deep blue eyes, and Jake was struck again by the intelligence he saw there. Her father had dismissed her as defective, but Jake was beginning to suspect that whatever made her different from other Kytharans had nothing to do with her mental capabilities. "You do not need to concern yourself with my needs," she said softly, her accent giving her words a musical quality despite their cautious tone. "Actually, I do," Jake replied gently. "That's kind of the point." He opened one of the meal packets and handed it to her, noting how she accepted it with both hands in what he'd learned was a Kytharan gesture of gratitude. "You're not cargo, Maya. You're not a diplomatic gift or a burden or whatever your father tried to make you into back there. You're a person, and people have needs that matter." She stared at the meal packet as if it were some kind of puzzle she couldn't solve. "I do not understand why you did what you did," she said finally. "You gained nothing from it. You may have damaged relations between our peoples. And for what? Someone who cannot even properly exist in her own society." Jake leaned back in his seat, studying her carefully. "What do you think makes someone unable to properly exist in society?" "I cannot resonate with crystal technology," Maya said, repeating what was clearly a statement she'd heard many times before. "I cannot contribute to the harmonic systems that power our civilization. I cannot even make the simplest devices respond to my presence. In Kytharan culture, this makes me less than worthless. And what do you think about that?" Jake asked. The question seemed to surprise her. She tilted her head slightly, and Jake noticed that even this small gesture had a grace to it that suggested strength rather than fragility. "What I think is irrelevant. It is simply the truth of what I am." "No," Jake said firmly. "It's the truth of what they told you that you are. There's a difference." He opened his own meal packet and took a bite, giving her time to process his words. "In human culture, we have a saying, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. But sometimes, the nail that sticks out is the only thing holding the whole structure together." Maya opened her meal packet with careful precision, her movements economical and practiced. Jake noticed that she ate slowly, as if she was used to rationing food or perhaps had learned to draw out meals as one of the few pleasant experiences in her day. "Your people have many sayings," she observed. "I heard them during cultural exchange programs. They often seem to contradict each other." Jake laughed, surprised by her dry observation. "That's because humans are complicated. We like to think. We can solve everything with words, but mostly we just end up confusing ourselves." He studied her as she ate, noting how she seemed to be listening to something he couldn't hear. "Can I ask you something personal?" She nodded, though Jake noticed her shoulders tense slightly. "When you say you can't resonate with crystal technology, what exactly does that mean?" "I've studied Kytharan culture for years, but I've never gotten a clear explanation of how the resonance actually works." Maya was quiet for so long that Jake began to wonder if he'd overstepped some boundary. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Other Kytharans, when they approach crystal tech, their bodies naturally harmonize with the frequency patterns. Their skin brightens, the crystals respond, and they can interface directly with the systems. For them, it is as natural as breathing. And for you?" "For me, the crystals remain silent. No matter how hard I try, no matter what meditation techniques or amplification devices they use, I cannot make them respond. The healers say it is a genetic defect, that something in my biological structure prevents proper frequency transmission." She paused, her fingers tracing patterns on the table surface. "They tested me repeatedly as a child, trying different methods, different crystals, different procedures. Nothing worked." Jake felt a cold anger building in his chest as he imagined a young Maya being subjected to test after test, treatment after treatment, all designed to fix what others had decided was broken about her. That must have been difficult. "It was necessary," Maya said automatically, though Jake caught a flicker of something else in her expression. They needed to understand the extent of my deficiency. Maya, Jake said gently, what if you're not deficient? What if you're just different? She looked at him with an expression that might have been hope if she'd allowed herself to feel such a dangerous emotion. Different how? I don't know yet, Jake admitted. But I've learned that sometimes the most important discoveries come from the things that don't work the way they're supposed to. He finished his meal and set the empty packet aside. We're going to Haven Colony. It's a quiet agricultural world where humans and several other species live together. No crystal technology, no harmonic requirements, no tests or treatments, or people telling you what you can't do. And what will I do there? Maya asked. Jake smiled. Whatever you want. Maybe for the first time in your life, you'll get to find out who you really are when nobody's trying to fix you. Maya stared at him for a long moment, and Jake could see something shifting behind her eyes. It was subtle, like the first crack in ice before a spring thaw, but it was there. I do not know how to want things, she said finally. Then we'll figure that out together, Jake replied. We've got plenty of time. As the freighter continued its journey toward the outer colonies, Maya found herself studying this strange human who had appended her entire existence with a few simple words. For the first time in her life, someone was asking her what she thought, what she wanted, what she chose. The concepts felt foreign and dangerous and impossibly precious all at once. Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled slowly past, and Maya allowed herself to wonder what it might feel like to exist in a world where silence was a choice rather than a survival strategy. Haven Colony appeared on the viewport like a jewel suspended against the starfield, its green and blue surface unmarked by the gleaming crystal spires that defined Kytharan architecture. Maya pressed her face to the reinforced transparisteel, watching as Jake pointed out the agricultural sectors and small settlements scattered across the continent below. There were no towering cities, no massive industrial complexes, just clusters of buildings that seemed to grow organically from the landscape itself. The landing port was a simple affair, nothing like the elaborate ceremonial platforms of Kythara Prime or the sterile efficiency of human military installations. A handful of cargo shuttles rested on basic landing pads, while ground crews worked with an unhurried efficiency that spoke of people who had learned to live at their own pace. Maya noticed that the workers included humans, several species she recognized, and a few she didn't, all moving together without the rigid hierarchies that had defined every social interaction she'd ever witnessed. Captain Torres clapped Jake on the shoulder as they gathered their few belongings. Haven's a good choice, Morrison. Quiet folk out here. Don't ask too many questions. Don't judge too quickly. Perfect place for someone to find their feet. He nodded respectfully to Maya. Miss, you ever need passage anywhere else? You just ask around for old Torres. Folks here know how to reach me. Maya managed a small smile, still adjusting to the casual kindness that seemed to surround Jake wherever he went. She'd expected the freighter captain to treat her with the mixture of pity and discomfort she was accustomed to, but instead he'd simply accepted her presence as if displaced alien. Nobility was a perfectly normal cargo to be hauling around the outer colonies. The walk through Haven Port revealed a community unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. Market stalls offered produce from a dozen different worlds, while vendors called out their wares in multiple languages. Children of various species played together in the common areas, their games apparently transcending biological differences. Maya watched a young human girl teaching what appeared to be a Centauri child how to skip stones across a decorative pond, both of them laughing at their spectacular failures. It's different from what you're used to, Jake observed, noticing her fascination with the scene. Everything is mixed together, Maya said, her voice carrying a note of wonder. Kytharan settlements are organized by resonance caste and family lineage. Each district has specific purposes, specific populations. This looks like... She paused, searching for the right word. Chaos? Jake suggested with a grin. Freedom, Maya finished quietly. They caught a local transport to the residential district where Jake had arranged temporary housing. The vehicle was an old hover truck that had seen better decades. Its driver a chatty Rigelian who seemed to know everyone's business and was happy to share it. Maya learned more about Haven Colony in that 20-minute ride than she had about her own homeworld in years of palace living. The house Jake had rented sat on the edge of the settlement, close enough to access community resources, but far enough out to provide privacy. It was a simple structure, built from local stone and timber, with large windows that offered views of rolling hills and cultivated fields. Maya stood in the main room, turning slowly to take in the space, her expression unreadable. "It's not much," Jake said, suddenly aware of how modest the accommodations were compared to imperial palaces. "But it's ours for as long as we need it. There's a garden out back where you can grow things if you want to, and the neighbors are friendly." Without being intrusive, Maya walked to one of the windows and placed her hand against the glass, watching the alien sunset paint the sky in colors that had no Kytharan names. "It's mine?" she asked softly. "It's ours," Jake corrected. "You live here. You have just as much say in how things work as I do." She turned to look at him, and Jake was struck by how the natural light seemed to bring out qualities in her that the artificial palace illumination had hidden. Her skin, which had appeared merely opaque among her luminous relatives, had its own subtle beauty in the warm evening glow. More importantly, the rigid posture she'd maintained since the ceremony was beginning to soften, as if she was slowly remembering how to breathe. The next few days established a rhythm that Maya found both foreign and comforting. Jake worked in the mornings, helping local farmers with equipment maintenance and crop rotation planning, skills he'd picked up during his military service on agricultural worlds. He always asked if Maya wanted to come with him, and when she declined, he simply accepted her choice without question or pressure. Maya spent those first mornings exploring the house and its immediate surroundings with the cautious curiosity of someone who had never been allowed to investigate anything unsupervised. She discovered that the kitchen was stocked with ingredients from multiple worlds, and that Jake had somehow acquired Kytharan-compatible foods without making a production of it. She found books written in languages she recognized and several she didn't, all apparently left for her to explore at her own pace. The garden behind the house became her first real project. The previous tenants had left raised beds and basic tools, but the plantings were wild and overgrown. Maya found herself drawn to the work of sorting through the chaos, learning to distinguish between useful plants and invasive weeds. Her hands, which had spent years idle in the palace, learned the satisfaction of dirt under her fingernails and muscles that ached from honest work. Jake never directed her activities, but he was always available when she had questions. He showed her how to test soil composition, how to identify plant diseases, how to construct proper irrigation channels. What struck Maya most profoundly was that he taught her not as a master instructing a student, but as a partner sharing knowledge. When she made mistakes, he helped her understand what had gone wrong without making her feel incompetent. The evenings were perhaps the most revolutionary part of her new existence. Instead of formal dinners with prescribed conversation topics and careful protocol, she and Jake would prepare simple meals together while discussing whatever came to mind. Maya discovered that she had opinions about things, preferences and ideas that had been so thoroughly suppressed that she'd forgotten they existed. She liked the taste of Terran tomatoes better than the perfectly engineered fruits of Kytharan agriculture. She enjoyed the chaotic beauty of wildflower arrangements more than the geometric precision of imperial garden design. She found herself laughing at Jake's stories about his military service, not because protocol demanded it, but because his dry observations about bureaucratic absurdity genuinely amused her. Most remarkably, she began to sleep peacefully. For the first time in her adult life, Maya woke up naturally rather than to the sound of servants announcing her schedule. She discovered that she was naturally an early riser, that she enjoyed the quiet hours before dawn when the world belonged to her alone. She would make tea and sit in the garden, watching the local sunrise and listening to the sounds of a world. Waking up without fanfare or ceremony. One morning, Jake found her there with her hands wrapped around a steaming cup, her expression more peaceful than he'd ever seen it. "Good morning," he said quietly, settling into the chair beside her. "Good morning," Maya replied, and Jake realized it was the first time he'd heard her speak without weighing each word for potential consequences. "Jake, thank you. For what?" Maya gestured toward the garden, the house, the wide sky above them. "For teaching me what normal feels like." Jake smiled, watching as the first rays of sunlight caught the subtle patterns in her skin that no artificial lighting had ever revealed. "You're very welcome." "But Maya, this isn't just normal. This is what you deserve." For the first time since he'd known her, Maya looked like she might actually be beginning to believe that. 3 months passed before Maya discovered what she truly was. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning while she was working in the expanded garden that had become her pride and joy. Jake was in town picking up supplies when the first Imperial scout ship appeared in Haven sky, its sleek hull gleaming like a knife against the peaceful blue atmosphere. Maya felt it before she saw it, a strange resonance in her bones that made her teeth ache and her skin tingle. She looked up from the flower bed she'd been weeding to see the unmistakable silhouette of a Kytharan vessel descending toward the settlement. Her blood turned to ice as she realized that somehow, despite all their precautions, they had been found. The ship landed in the town square with ceremonial precision, and Maya watched from behind the garden fence as Imperial guards emerged in full battle regalia. She could see the crystal weapons at their sides, the harmonic scanners that would lock onto any Kytharan biosignature within 100 kilometers. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and Jake was somewhere in that town completely unaware that the peaceful life they'd built together was about to end. But as Maya crouched there in the dirt between the tomato plants and the wildflower border, something strange began to happen. The fear that should have paralyzed her instead seemed to awaken something deep in her chest, a warmth that spread through her body like liquid sunlight. Her skin, which had remained stubbornly opaque for her entire life, began to glow with a soft silver radiance that was nothing like the blue-white luminescence of other Kytharans. The plants around her responded to the change, their leaves turning toward her as if she were a second sun. The flowers she'd been tending burst into sudden bloom, their petals unfurling with impossible speed and vibrancy. Even the vegetables in the nearby beds seemed to pulse with renewed life, their fruits swelling and ripening before her eyes. Maya stared at her glowing hands in amazement, finally understanding why the crystal technology of her people had never responded to her touch. She wasn't resonance dead. She was resonance different. While other Kytharans channeled energy through artificial crystals, her gift lay in the oldest form of resonance known to their species, direct harmony with living systems. The realization brought with it a flood of inherited memories, genetic knowledge that had been suppressed by generations of selective breeding focused on technological compatibility. She remembered now why the ancient Kytharans had been called the Gardener Kings, why the first colonies had flourished under their touch, why the crystal technology had originally been developed to supplement, rather than replace their natural abilities. Her father hadn't given away a broken daughter. He'd discarded the key to their species' survival. Jake found her there an hour later, kneeling in the garden with her arms wrapped around herself, her entire body radiating that impossible silver light. The Imperial troops had already left, their scanners apparently unable to detect her transformed biosignature, but Jake could see in her expression that everything had changed. "They came looking for me," Maya said without preamble, "but they couldn't find me. Not like this." She held up her hands, watching the way the light played across her skin like captured starfire. I'm not what they thought I was, Jake. I'm not what anyone thought I was. Jake knelt beside her in the soft earth, his human warmth a perfect counterpoint to her alien radiance. What are you then? Maya smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it was a smile without shadows. I'm exactly what I was meant to be. She reached out to touch a flowering vine that immediately burst into a cascade of blooms, filling the air with sweet perfume. The ancient Kytharans weren't just crystal workers, Jake. We were life-bringers, world healers. My father's people bred that gift out of themselves in pursuit of technological power, but it survived in the dormant lines, in the ones they called defective. Understanding dawned in Jake's eyes, and contact with humans awakened it. Not contact, Maya corrected gently. Love, acceptance, the kind of emotional resonance that my people forgot how to achieve. She took his hand, and Jake felt a warm, tingling sensation as her light flowed over his skin. They'll come back eventually, when they realize what I've become, but by then, I'll be ready for them. We'll be ready, Jake corrected, his fingers intertwining with hers. Maya looked out over the garden they'd built together, then up at the sky where stars were beginning to appear in the gathering dusk. Her people had spent centuries reaching toward those distant lights with technology and conquest, never realizing that the greatest power lay not in dominating the universe, but in nurturing it. Emperor Varrock had cast away his daughter as a worthless gift, never imagining that he was giving humanity the key to healing not just his own dying empire, but entire worlds. And Jake Morrison, a simple human who had seen worth where others saw. Only failure had become the catalyst for the rebirth of powers that predated civilizations. Together, they would show the galaxy what it meant to grow rather than merely conquer, to heal rather than merely rule. The broken gift had found her purpose at last, and the human who had seen her true beauty would help her reshape the stars themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.